Crowds froze in shock. A sharp crack echoed through the luxury mall as a young woman stumbled backward, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide with both pain and disbelief. She was visibly pregnant, her hands instinctively shielding the life inside her. The man standing before her, tall, handsome, and wearing a perfectly tailored suit, didn't even flinch. He was her husband, the CEO admired by many, feared by his employees, and praised for his ruthless business brilliance. But in that single moment, with his hand still raised from striking her, the mask slipped. His cruelty stood naked for the world to see. Standing just a few steps away, a woman with expensive jewelry and smug eyes smirked, satisfied with the scene. She was the mistress. The crowd whispered in gasps, some too shocked to move, others raising their phones to record. But no one dared to step forward. No one except one man, a mall security guard, gray streaks in his hair, a sharpness in his gaze that didn't belong to a simple guard, clenched his fists. His jaw tightened, because that young woman, the one humiliated and bruised, was his daughter. And while the world saw only a uniformed guard, they didn't know he was one of the wealthiest men alive, hiding his identity in plain sight, watching the man who had dared to call himself his son-in-law. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and justice for those who suffer silently, please don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel, Stories Collection. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive. The woman's name was Emily. She hadn't married for money, nor for power. She had fallen in love with Daniel back when he was just an ambitious young man, fighting to climb the corporate ladder. She believed in his dreams, supported him through sleepless nights, and trusted his promises of a future filled with love. But power changes people. The moment Daniel became CEO, his heart shifted. He was intoxicated by the attention, the money, and the allure of women who only cared for his wealth. The mistress, Serena, was one of them, a glamorous figure who whispered lies into his ears, feeding his ego until he no longer saw Emily as his partner, but as a burden. Still, Emily endured. She held on for the child she carried, for the memories of who he once was, and for the vow she had made. But nothing prepared her for the day when humiliation would strike so publicly, under the bright mall lights, in front of strangers and flashing cameras. The slap was not just against her face, it was against her dignity, against the child she carried, and against the love she had given unconditionally. Tears filled her eyes, but Emily didn't cry aloud. Her silence spoke louder than screams. She straightened slowly, trembling but unbroken, her hand still covering her cheek as she looked at Daniel with a mixture of hurt and strength. He smirked coldly, turning toward Serena, as though the wife carrying his child was less important than the mistress on his arm. The crowd whispered words like shame and disgrace, but none dared to interfere. That was when the guard moved. He stepped out from the corner, his boots echoing against the marble floor, his broad frame cutting through the crowd. His voice, calm yet powerful, carried across the silence as he told Daniel to stop. Daniel sneered, dismissing him with a wave, calling him just a guard. But Emily's eyes widened, her heart racing, because behind that uniform was her father, Richard Lawson, a billionaire tycoon who had chosen a simple disguise to see the truth of the man his daughter had married. Richard had never trusted Daniel. Something about his hunger for power felt dangerous. So he placed himself quietly within their lives, sometimes as a driver, sometimes as a guard, always observing, always watching. Emily didn't know her father's true wealth because Richard believed in humility, in teaching his daughter the value of love and character over money. She grew up thinking he was an ordinary man with a modest job. But now the mask would finally fall. Richard's eyes burned with fury as he grabbed Daniel by the collar, shocking the entire crowd. No one had ever dared to lay hands on the mighty CEO before. Yet this guard did so with authority, with the weight of someone who had nothing to fear. Daniel struggled, shouting insults, but Richard's voice cut through with the calm rage of a man who had waited long enough. He declared for all to hear that no one had the right to raise a hand against his daughter. Not even the man who vowed to love her. Emily's breath caught. The crowd gasped. Daniel froze as realization dawned. This was not just a guard. Reporters who had rushed into the scene recognized Richard's face from old financial magazines. Whispers spread like wildfire. This man was Richard Lawson, a billionaire known for disappearing from the public eye years ago. The Mistress Serena's smirk faltered, her gold, digging eyes widening in horror. The CEO's arrogance crumbled as Richard, with one swift call, brought down not only Daniel's pride but his empire. For behind the disguise, Richard still controlled power greater than Daniel could ever dream of. His security detail, hidden until now, stepped out from the crowd, surrounding the scene as though it had been orchestrated from the start. But Richard didn't focus on Daniel. He turned to his daughter, his eyes softening, his hands trembling as he reached to touch her face. Emily had always believed her father to be simple, ordinary, and now she realized the depth of his sacrifice. He had hidden his identity so she could live a life untainted by greed. Her tears finally spilled, not just from the pain of betrayal, but from the love she felt as her father embraced her in the middle of the mall, shielding her from all eyes, all judgment. For once, she was safe again. The days that followed were not easy. Divorce papers were filed, scandals erupted, and Daniel's reputation collapsed as investors fled. Serena, the mistress who once paraded her stolen victory, disappeared the moment the wealth dried up. But Emily chose healing. She took time to rebuild herself, to surround herself with love, and to prepare for the child who deserved a life filled not with pain but with hope. Richard stood by her side every step of the way, proving that a father's love was stronger than any empire, more valuable than any fortune. And as Emily walked forward into a new chapter, she carried with her not just the scars of betrayal, but the courage of survival, the strength of forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Every click keeps these stories alive and inspires more people around the world. Special request before we end: comment below what you would do if you saw someone treated the way Emily was. Would you stay silent, or would you stand up for them? The sound of that slap didn't just echo in the air of the luxury mall. It echoed in Emily's soul. For a moment she stood frozen, her cheek burning, her vision blurring as 1,000 eyes bored into her. The whispers of strangers circled like knives, and the sting of humiliation cut deeper than the physical pain. She was carrying a child, their child, and yet the man she had once trusted with her entire heart now treated her as nothing more than an inconvenience. Emily's chest tightened as she tried to steady her breathing. She refused to fall. She refused to give Serena, the mistress smirking beside her husband, the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. Her hands moved protectively to her belly, instinctively shielding the tiny life within. Her lips trembled, but she stayed upright, her silence louder than all the gasps around her. Daniel, tall and polished in his tailored suit, sneered down at her as though she were the one who had embarrassed him. He muttered something cruel under his breath, but Emily barely heard it. The pounding in her ears was too loud. Serena leaned closer to him, brushing a manicured hand along his arm, whispering sweet poison. The crowd could see what was happening. Some shook their heads, others raised their phones higher to record, yet no one moved to help. This was the cruelty of public shame. Everyone wanted a piece of the spectacle, but no one wanted to risk stepping forward. But one man did. From the corner of the mall, a guard who had been watching quietly began to move. His stride was steady, each step deliberate. His face carved with control, though his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. His gray, streaked hair and rugged uniform made him seem like just another mall employee, but his eyes told another story. They were sharp, commanding, and filled with a fury that could no longer be contained. That guard was Richard Lawson. The world might have forgotten his face after he withdrew from public life, but once, years ago, he had been among the richest and most powerful men alive. And now, dressed as a humble protector of the mall, he was watching his daughter, the daughter he had once cradled in his arms. Humiliated by the man she had given everything to, Richard had suspected Daniel's arrogance long before Emily had seen it. He had seen the way Daniel's smile never reached his eyes, how his ambitions carried more hunger than vision. But Richard had chosen silence, allowing his daughter to follow her heart, disguising his fortune to test the man she loved. For Richard believed true character revealed itself when wealth was absent. Yet now, standing in the harsh light of betrayal, he knew his test had run long enough. The time for silence was over. As Richard reached them, Daniel turned sharply, his arrogance flaring. He snapped at the guard to mind his place, dismissing him with the arrogance of a man who thought money could shield him from consequence. The crowd expected the guard to retreat, but instead, Richard seized Daniel's collar with a force that stunned everyone. The mighty CEO stumbled, his composure cracking. Gasps erupted, Serena let out a shrill cry, and phones shook as bystanders scrambled to capture the moment. Daniel roared in outrage, demanding the guard's dismissal. But Richard's voice cut through him like a blade, steady, powerful, and laced with decades of authority. He told Daniel, loud enough for every witness to hear, that no man had the right to raise his hand against a woman, least of all the woman carrying his child. Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. That voice, she knew it. It wasn't just a guard's voice. It was her father's. The revelation struck her harder than the slap had. In that instant, memories flooded back, her father's constant presence in quiet roles, his gentle advice disguised as simple words, his insistence on humility when she wondered why their life was so modest. He hadn't been poor. He had been protecting her, and now he was protecting her again. The crowd shifted, the whispers growing into a roar. People began recognizing Richard's face, recalling old magazine covers, financial news, the billionaire who had walked away from the spotlight. Serena's smug smile melted into fear as she realized the truth. Daniel's arrogance faltered, his lips parting as the weight of who stood before him sank in. This wasn't a powerless guard. This was Richard Lawson, and Richard Lawson had just declared war. Richard pulled his daughter gently into his embrace, his fury softening into tenderness as he touched her face where the slap had landed. Emily broke then. The tears she had held back spilled down her cheeks as she clung to him, trembling not from fear, but from relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was safe. Safe in the arms of the man who had always loved her without condition, who had never wavered even in disguise. The crowd, once eager for scandal, now stood in silent reverence. They weren't just witnesses to a scene of betrayal anymore. They were witnesses to the unmasking of love stronger than money, stronger than pride, stronger than cruelty. Daniel tried to recover, but it was too late. Richard's eyes locked on him, cold and unyielding. And with a single call placed to his hidden network of allies and lawyers, Daniel's empire, built on arrogance and greed, began to crumble.